Starting today, my sister will be living with us. It's all good news, so there's no reason to oppose it, right?
As soon as the move was finished, my husband strutted in, bringing his sister-in-law along. Indeed, as my husband said, my beloved grandfather had recently passed away. I was physically and emotionally drained from handling the funeral arrangements, sorting through his belongings, and most of all, the sudden loss of someone I loved dearly. The house where my grandfather lived, which I inherited as part of his estate, was where my husband suggested we move to. Just when I had finally finished moving in, my husband brought his sister-in-law without any discussion. A move so out of line that my love for him rapidly wilted. I'm Aurora. I graduated from the local university's pharmacy program and have been working as a pharmacist for 5 years. I met my husband, a fellow classmate, 2 years ago through a colleague at the hospital where I work. My husband, a full-time employee at a grocery store, has a generous nature. He had just broken up with a girlfriend from his student days and seemed heartbroken. I only had one boyfriend once in high school, and it didn't last long. Neither of us had much experience in love, but somehow that felt reassuring. Our different jobs meant our days off rarely aligned, but we still managed a smooth relationship, and we got married when he was promoted to chief at his workplace. After our marriage, we rented an apartment in a convenient part of the city and started living together. My parents died in an accident, and since high school, I'd been living with my grandfather in his house. The house was very old, creaking with every step. But for the past 6 months, with his worsening illness and frequent hospital visits, it had been mostly empty. It was an important house for me too, filled with memories of my grandfather, and I still went back to clean it from time to time. Despite his exhaustion from the illness, my grandfather was overjoyed about my marriage.
I can keep fighting this tough treatment now.
I resolved to be truly happy, cherishing his words. Fortunately, I got along well with my husband's parents. They lived quite far away, so we might only meet a few times a year. "You're always welcome to visit," they had said. I had a promising start to a happy married life. But there was one thing that worried me: my sister-in-law. She's a lively 19-year-old in her first year of university. Living away from her family home, she attends a university near our apartment. My husband chose our place partly because it was close to the university his sister attended. They'd always been close, and she had expressed a desire for us to move nearby. Of course, it's good to be close with family, but I regretted not discussing it more when my husband practically decided on our living arrangement based on his sister's whims. 3 days after the move, on a weekend when I planned to finally sort through the remaining boxes, my husband brought my sister-in-law over unannounced. Caught off guard in casual clothes and no makeup, I was flustered. I couldn't just send her away, so I hurriedly cleared some space and had her sit in the living room. I had met her a few times while we were dating, but always with prior arrangement, and only when we were out, so I had been properly dressed. If I'd known she was coming, I would have dressed up, I said irritably to my husband, but decided to calm down in front of my sister-in-law. "Congratulations on your marriage. Please take good care of my brother," my sister-in-law said, handing me a paper bag. Inside was baked goods from a famous bakery.
"You didn't have to go to such trouble. If I try to return the favor, it'll cost me a fortune,"
my husband said, peeking inside and laughing carelessly, but I was inwardly tense. As my husband said, my sister-in-law was quite a spendthrift. With her expensive clothes and accessories, she seemed too young for such luxury items. I had subtly asked my husband if she might be involved in something dubious, but he changed his expression instantly when it came to my sister-in-law.
"She wouldn't do anything like that, but I'm worried, so I'll offer to help her out financially if she's struggling," he said.
My sister-in-law supposedly receiving a monthly allowance from her parents. I heard it from my mother-in-law herself, and she even told me how much, so I don't think it's a lie. Despite receiving enough money to live comfortably without any luxury, separate from tuition, my sister-in-law is currently also receiving an allowance from my husband. When I said it's all too indulgent, my husband argued back, and it turned into a heated argument. I could somewhat understand his concern for his sister, but I was also displeased, because there were times he'd send my sister-in-law expensive purses and accessories every month, and even go to her apartment to cook for her. But aside from that, he was a kind husband who willingly did household chores, so that was my only concern about him.
The problem lies with my sister-in-law herself. My sister-in-law, it seems, doesn't think highly of me and acts condescending. I guess in her world, where her parents and brother dance to her tune, I must seem like an obstacle.
Aurora as a wife type was unexpected. My brother used to date mostly beautiful women like models. Aurora, you are, how should I say, more plain. There's a difference between who you date and who you marry, right? Hope he doesn't cheat on you. Aurora, you're a pharmacist, right? So you must earn a good salary. Why don't you dress more fashionably? You were such a nerdy student, only good at studying, weren't you? She whispers these endless snide remarks when my husband isn't around. She's essentially a 19-year-old kid, and it's exhausting to deal with her seriously. There were times I thought about telling my husband, especially when she was persistent. But he dotes on my sister-in-law and could easily imagine it would only lead to more trouble. Since her harassment was limited to mean comments, I decided to keep it to myself and not tell anyone. Besides, we're in for a long relationship, and trying to get along in a hurry would only backfire, so I thought it'd be better to gradually deepen our relationship without taking it too seriously. Just a few days ago, my sister-in-law, who I'd met recently, came over again without notice. But at that time, my husband hadn't returned home yet, and I was preparing for my afternoon shift. The cafeteria was crowded, so I thought I'd come over for lunch. I brought some friends too, is that okay? Suppressing the urge to shout at her unreasonable behavior, I managed to send her and her classmates, who were standing beside her, home while keeping my composure. I don't know how she narrated the incident, but during my evening shift, I received several calls from my husband.
Turning away hungry kids, are you out of your mind? If you were busy, you could have at least given them some money. My sister called to say she was embarrassed in front of her friends.
I don't know if this was the trigger, but I started noticing a change in my husband's attitude around this time. The household chores, which we had agreed to share since we both work, gradually stopped being done by him, and as I couldn't stand things being left for days, I ended up doing everything, and it became solely my burden. His easygoing nature, which I had admired, turned out to be just sloppiness. His newly acquired hobbies would quickly be abandoned and gather dust, which was a common occurrence. When his hobby stuff started cluttering not only his room, but also the dining table and car, I had to speak up. But he just ignored it and didn't deal with it. I feel like even his interest in me is fading because I'm always nagging. He's so neglectful, but when it comes to my sister-in-law, it's different. My sister-in-law's unannounced visits continued, and she would eat our food and torment me without any pretense. Initially, she did this behind my husband's back, but recently, knowing he's on her side, she openly makes snide remarks. She criticizes the food I make. This seasoning is too strong. Are you really a pharmacist? Are you deliberately making people sick with weird food so they'll buy your drugs? Bro, you better watch out. She would make these terrible jokes, insulting even my profession, and my husband would just laugh along. And every time she would wheedle a considerable amount of money from him, not just pocket change. I'm running low on living expenses. Or, I want to buy textbooks for college. I can understand, but I want to buy a birthday present for a friend. Now that's just her own convenience. Moreover, she drags my husband along for shopping and makes him buy expensive brand items. When I point this out, of course, it's my right to spend my own money. He snaps back, making any conversation futile. My husband, unaware, doesn't see my sister-in-law laughing at me, getting everything she asks for while his wife gets nothing. Whenever I try to address anything with my sister-in-law, she immediately turns on the waterworks and melodramatically seeks my husband's help. His falling for such poor acting is beyond saving. I realize too late that my husband has an extreme fondness for his sister. His belief in everything my sister-in-law says and lecturing me is laughably pathetic and enough to kill any affection. But my sister-in-law, now in her third year, will soon be busy with job hunting and senior paper writing, so I decided to endure it a little longer. I hoped that after graduating, she'd quickly get married and her mean streak would calm down somewhat. Yet, what hit me hardest wasn't my husband or my sister-in-law, but the death of my beloved grandfather. With no grandparents or parents left, I inherited his estate. I thought about demolishing the house, which held beautiful memories, but my husband stopped me.
We should live in this magnificent house as a couple,
he suggested. My grandfather, who had a long hospital stay in his later years,
hardly knew my husband. His desire to keep this house was unexpected, and I was overjoyed at that moment. My grandfather was gone, but I could return to this house. The bubble burst just a few months later. During a pre-move inspection, we found that only the plumbing needed repairs. My grandfather cherished this house he built in his youth, and the contractor even commented on its good condition for its age. The creaking floors bothered me, but I thought we could remodel when we started a family. I cleaned the rooms in between work and sorted my grandfather's belongings. Once everything was packed and ready, I proceeded with the movers, thinking my husband had stepped out to the nearby grocery store when he disappeared without a word. I was surprised when he didn't return by departure time and responded curtly to my frantic calls to go ahead without him. Confused but not wanting to delay the movers, I headed to my grandfather's house first. I finally saw my husband after all the moving and paperwork are done, standing beside my sister-in-law. An uneasy feeling hit me right away, and it proved right when my husband dropped a bombshell. From today, it's the three of us living here. The house is big, and Aurora, you'd be lonely with just the two of us, right? It's cruel to have my sister live in a small apartment every month, and this is perfect timing. Aurora, you'll support her job search, won't you? What? Why would you decide that on your own? This is my grandfather's house. You should have consulted me first. It wouldn't matter if I did, right? The house will be livelier, and my sister can focus on her studies and job hunting. What's the problem? To be clear, it is a problem. We'll talk about this in detail later. So can you leave for today? I was exhausted from handling the funeral and moving preparations alone for months. I had no mental energy to speak to someone who casually mentioned living in this house after my grandfather's death as good timing. But my husband just yelled, not caring at all. What right do you have to say that? If you don't like living together, then you can leave. I proposed this thinking it was a good idea, and now you're talking down to me. I'd feel refreshed if you were gone. I won't tolerate anyone who treats my precious family badly. I was shocked by his words, as if he didn't consider me family at all. But I decided there was no need to seriously engage with such ridiculous people, and chose to stay calm. So what? Are you saying I should leave? Meaning we should divorce? I just want to confirm, so you can't claim you were tricked later. This house is mine by inheritance. The rights to this house are... Since we're divorcing, it'll come to a distribution of property, right? The house is a substantial inheritance. Are you saying just because your grandpa owned it, it's all yours? Look, the world doesn't revolve around you. I'm a rightful ex-husband, so I have a claim to half. I'll pay you for your half, so just leave. What my husband interrupted to say was utterly nonsensical. Aurora, you're always so stingy with money. You earn well yourself, but always want too much. You should be kinder to someone younger, you know, Auntie. You might think of me as a frivolous young girl, but girls need money. On the contrary, you always dress so plainly, wear heavy makeup. What do you even spend your money on? You've completely given up being a woman. It's pathetic. My sister-in-law, having completely won my husband over, joined him in accusing me. Seeing this, I completely lost any affection for them both, and just wanted to leave as soon as possible. So I told them I would go. The rights to the house are no longer an issue, but are you sure? I want to confirm properly. The siblings seemed briefly puzzled by how easily things were resolved, but then they began smirking again. Trying to unsettle us was so obvious. Such a sore loser. Well, I appreciate that you agreed to the divorce. Here, sign this and leave. My husband threw the pre-filled divorce papers at me. I was so fed up that I was relieved it was happening quickly. Talk about sour grapes. Sorry, I'm more loved than you, Aurora. When you remarry, maybe try being a bit more feminine. They laughed together, so I sighed heavily and picked up the divorce papers. Hearing that, my sister-in-law started to confront me again, so I turned to my husband. You're so clueless, poor thing. Your wicked sister plans to kick you out soon, too. Instead of laughing, why don't you two have a proper fight? What? What are you talking about? My husband looked utterly foolish, still tilting his head. But my sister-in-law, perhaps due to her youth, couldn't keep a poker face and looked frozen. She seemed to come to her senses when my husband called her name. What are you saying, old lady? I would never do such a thing. But my sister-in-law's obvious panic seemed to unsettle my husband. Thinking I could turn the tables here, I forgot my tiredness and kindly explained. I overheard it by chance at a bar right in front of the university. You were too obsessed with your sister to come home, and I was too tired from all the paperwork and procedures to cook. I went out to eat with a friend to refresh. I took up my cell phone and played a recorded conversation. Since my brother's wife's grandpa passed away, I'll soon get that house. She is honestly annoying, but my brother is on my side. He does anything I say. It's funny, right? After I helped him when he was bullied by a guy friend of mine, he's been like that ever since. Well, he's got money, so I plan to use him well and take the house. No rent, lots of rooms, it's perfect. I want to live there together, so once I get the house, I'll just extract money from him and kick him out. Probably no problem. I think the old lady will get desperate if my brother mentions the house as a condition for divorce. Fortunately, I was seated nearby, so despite the noisy restaurant, the recording was clear. Initially, I started recording out of curiosity when they began bad-mouthing not just me, but also my husband. However, as they got drunker and more excited, they began discussing the worst plans, and that's when I unexpectedly caught them red-handed. I decided not to tell my husband about this immediately, waiting to see what he would do. Sadly, he fell for my sister-in-law's manipulation and presented me with divorce, which I agreed to. I had confirmed that my sister-in-law was at that table when I went to the restroom and returned. My husband stared at my sister-in-law with a shaking voice and a pale face. My sister-in-law, after looking down for a while, suddenly raised her face, red with anger, and protested. "This is fabrication. It's too convenient to be in the same restaurant. You don't even know my boyfriend, and it's creepy to assume based on seeing someone who looks a bit like him. And even if this really is me, it's crazy to spy on me like this. Stop playing detective and dragging people into it." Seeing she still had some fight left, I resumed playing the rest of the recording. The sound of boots clattering towards the restroom, seemingly from a drunk person. Then a man's voice on the phone, talking to a woman in a cloying tone. He referred to my sister-in-law as an ATM, saying she would get him a house from the ATM's family. The man bragged about my sister-in-law gifting him whatever he asked for and giving him money since she wasn't working. My sister-in-law had been funneling the branded gifts she received from my husband to this boyfriend, along with money from her part-time job. Initially, I felt sorry for my sister-in-law being played, but now the situation was different. She was scheming behind my back, planning to involve my grandfather's house, so she deserved what was coming. After the playback, my sister-in-law was in a daze with no energy left to claim mistaken identity, confirming for my husband that she was indeed the woman talking with the man. Having said all I needed, I was about to leave when my husband grabbed my hand from behind. "Wait, you see now, right, Aurora? I was just being deceived. Let's cancel the divorce and live together as promised." "What? No need to cancel. I want the divorce too. Besides, your dear sister is crying. Take care of her until the end." I smiled brightly at my husband, feeling liberated, and quickly left with my minimal belongings. I filed the divorce papers and the divorce was finalized. I wanted to enjoy a relaxed single life, but things weren't that simple. My ex-husband was squatting in my grandfather's house, refusing to leave. Not wanting to interact, I had a lawyer explain that the estate wasn't subject to distribution of property. "So what does distribution of property mean then? No rights for the husband?" But he was unaccepting. I consulted my in-laws, who I'd been in regular contact with. They came over like a whirlwind, confronting my ex-husband and my sister-in-law in both my grandfather's house and my sister-in-law's apartment, scolding them thoroughly. My father-in-law is apparently quite intimidating when angry, and my mother-in-law later told me with a laugh how the siblings were shaking. I began to understand why my ex-husband was reluctant to visit his parents' house. The in-laws apologized deeply for the divorce, but I explained it wasn't their fault, and I wasn't holding any grudges. I changed my phone number and email address, asking my mother-in-law not to share them with my ex-husband. I think my ex-husband was desperate for the inheritance because he probably had no savings. When we got married, I suggested opening a new bank account for joint savings, but he refused. He couldn't save due to student loans, cell phone bills, hobbies, and giving large sums to my sister-in-law. So we decided to save separately. I had investments, so I didn't have much cash on hand and couldn't give him any money anyway. Through the lawyer, I told him there would be no distribution of property in exchange for not claiming the divorce bond. Since he signed the papers under my father-in-law's pressure, I intend to enforce it strictly. Eventually, my ex-husband and my sister-in-law, who had been wasting my money, were taken back to their parents' house. My ex-husband quit his job, and my sister-in-law left the school to work as a junior employee in a relative's company. They're being reformed through hard physical work and cry every day. My mother-in-law sent me a picture of my ex-husband with a slimmed-down figure from the labor, but I felt no thrill. My sister-in-law tried to charm her superiors with her youth and beauty, but being a relative of the boss, she got no attention. Her long, shiny nails were gone, and she was now doing a wonderful job digging in the dirt. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying peaceful days in my nature-filled grandfather's house. Though I miss him, looking through the organized albums brings me back to those times. I'm thinking of inviting dear friends over for parties in this warm home, watched over by my grandfather.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.